Welcome to Ask the Expert North Texas here on News Radio 1080 KRLD. I'm David Rancken.
And I'm Kristin Diaz. And joining us this afternoon is Joel Schwitzer. He is the regional director of the American Jewish Committee. We're inviting you on our show today to have a really important conversation about the shooter that has been named in the Allen Outlet Mall shooting this past weekend, Mauricio Garcia. The name implies that he is Hispanic, but the FBI has been researching more into his background. There have been ties to white supremacy, neo-Nazism, and we bring this to the forefront as this conversation evolves to you, Joel, about the importance of knowing that this is still very much, unfortunately, in our community. There are people who are still bringing attention to this. How did you feel about knowing that there were ties with the Allen shooter to his beliefs?
Well, it's almost counterintuitive. And even though this is not the first time in recent months that we've heard about a member of the Latino community with white supremacist ties, while it's baffling, it's something we've seen pop up more and more. We saw last fall where former President Trump welcomed Nick Fuentes, a prominent white supremacist and Holocaust denier, into his Mar-a-Lago estate for a dinner. We saw just the other day that Enrique Tarrio, one of the leaders of the Proud Boys, was convicted of seditious conspiracy for his role in January 6th. And then, of course, Garcia just last weekend here in North Texas with his patch reading RWDS, Right Wing Death Squad. And so it's something we have to be aware that the ability for someone to become radicalized on the internet can cross racial and ethnic boundaries, even if it seems a little bit through the looking glass to us.
It's very strange because when you hear the phrase white supremacist, you assume that the people that are part of it are white, and you don't necessarily see them falling under a different rainbow of colors.
Yes, and I think they come to identify in that way a lot because of the association, whether you agree or disagree with it, but the association that many on the right have with patriotism and the way that term has been co-opted. And it is also, some might think, an attempt to de-otherize oneself. I feel like I'm being otherized, so I'm going to otherize this other group so that I can be part of what I perceive to be the majority, or in this case, whiteness.
Can we also say that we know that Latinos are not a monolith? We come in every color under the rainbow. And, when it comes to saying that a Latino has ties to white supremacy, can we also just say blatantly it's because of the color of their skin?
So I think it is hard to get in someone's head. This person, from what I understand, had a lot of hatred for a lot of different groups. I understand he was also very misogynistic and was part of the incel community. It seems to have been a very broad-based thing with this particular individual.
Is this just something where we just need to remove that one particular adjective from it because it is too limiting, that hate can go amongst all different kinds of groups, that they all kind of have a similar bond to them, color or not?
Yes, they may have, every supremacist may have their own hierarchy of who they hate more than others. For some, it may be members of the LGBT community or the AAPI or Black or Latino, so they may have their own internal hierarchy, but at the end of the day, a lot of them tend to be equal opportunity haters. That's very true.
Now, this suspect is said to have had a group that he communicated frequently with online about his beliefs. How, as a community, do we combat this type of hatred in anywhere in our country?
We need to do more in the area of bridge building. I was very proud that recently a member of my staff and one of our partners from the Latino community from the organization, the Concilio, went to Washington, D.C., along with the president of our board to celebrate the relaunch of the Congressional Jewish Latino Caucus in Congress. And together they listened to two different cabinet members, an array of speakers on the importance of Jewish Latino relations, and also a report on a recent survey that my organization, American Jewish Committee, commissioned on opinions of Latino, Gen Z, and millennial leaders of the Jewish community in Israel. And it's important to convene these conversations and get to know one another. And AJC does this with the Latino community, with the Muslim community, with the AAPI community, and others. And it's part of the really important work that we're engaged in every day.
One thing about these kinds of groups is they all seem to have one thing in common, and that is they feel, for whatever reason, that someone else has wronged them and it's their fault.
That's very true. We live in a grievance culture at the moment. I hope it's a moment we can all move out of together. The more that we get to know one another, and that we, instead of retreating to our neutral corners and say, I'm only going to listen to columnists that agree with my already held opinion, and the more we get out there and listen respectfully to others with different experiences, with different lived experiences, with different opinions, I think the more we will be ready to really engage civilly in our civil society.
You said that you worked with the Concilio and other organizations. When working with Latinos specifically, as we mentioned at the beginning of this interview, the kind of the rise of far right-wing Latino activists. How does culture and language play a role in being effective with combating hate?
So every year, our Jewish Latino Alliance here in Dallas convenes a Hanukkah y las Posadas party. And at the end of the day, these coalitions are really only effective if we're taking that next step, like going to DC for the Congressional Caucus launch. But the cultural things that we do jointly together are so important, because that's where you cement those relationships. That's where you develop those lines of communication. So when there are issues, community leader can go to community leader and know them, because they have a face to the name, because they see each other a couple times a year at these events. And we've seen that happen in the Latino community. We've seen it happen in the Muslim community. We have back channels to one another because our leaders know one another, and they connect and they get to know one another.
I hate to be a Debbie Downer here, but worst case scenario, people stop listening. People stop trying to communicate. What's the worst thing that happens?
I'm too much of an optimist for that. I couldn't get out of bed in the morning if I didn't feel like there wasn't an opportunity. I think there's really a thirst. The loud voices in the Twittersphere are what we tend to hear, and we believe that that's representative of everyone. But the reality is, most of us are between the 20-yard lines. We want a more civil society, and we need people who want that, not just to sit on the sidelines or wring their hands, but we need them to come together and speak up. And it's hard because people don't naturally get passionate about the middle, but that's exactly what we need. We need people to say, this is not the society we live in, and it certainly isn't the society that we want to live in. We want to live in one of mutual respect. We want to live in one where I can disagree with you, but acknowledge your humanity and still want to be to live in the same community. I often, you hear surveys today about how college students don't want to date someone who has the opposite political views from them. Well, I'm here to tell you, if that were true 50 years ago, I wouldn't exist, because my mother was a Democrat and my father was a Republican, and I hate to think that they wouldn't get together because of their opposite political views. And I know there are people listening to us today who are in that same situation.
Speaking of those who are listening to us today, what are some action items? It's one thing to feel that way and have it in your mind and have it in your heart of saying, oh, well, I do want peace and I do want my community to be well. But what are some action items that you suggest?
So first of all, get to know your neighbors, know people who are different from you, who have those different lived experiences than you do. Second of all, condemn hate. Whether it is hate against the Jewish community or the LGBT community or the Black community, we have to be ready to stand with one another. I know a year and a half ago, when we had the Colleyville hostage situation right here in our community, it meant the world to me when members of the Muslim community or my friends from the Mexican consulate here reached out to express their concern for us. So sometimes being an ally is as easy as just picking up the phone in times of crisis, and it's developing those relationships. It's that we do in the first point that I made there. It's developing those relationships in the long term that provide opportunities to come together and support one another when things go south.
Can those who hate learn to stop hating?
You see examples of it all the time. There are, there's that person whose parents were founders of the Westboro Baptist Church, that famous extremist organization that protests at soldiers' funerals and holds all kinds of despicable signs that I won't repeat here. One of their children goes around the country speaking out against them. There are plenty of examples where someone has broken out, but it takes a support system, and sometimes it takes a support system before that person is willing to accept a support system. But you've got to be patient, and you've got to be willing. But I find that very few people are irredeemable. I'm sure there are some who are, but again, you've got to be persistent, and you've got to be an optimist, and you've got to find others who you can lock arms with and help carry that message.
And that is going to be very important, especially for the North Texas community, as we continue to find out more about this shooting suspect and still try to understand what happened in our community of Allen over the weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.